They attacked the human's mate, then their strongest warrior fell. My name is Vorkai, and I am filing this report because my commanding officer demanded an explanation. He wants to know why 3 of his soldiers came back from Meridian 9 station with one of them on a stretcher, and why the incident log shows no retaliatory action was taken. He wants to know why I, a Drath warrior with 14 years of active combat service, stood completely still and did nothing while a single human male put our finest fighter on the floor of a crowded market. I am going to tell him exactly what happened. Every second of it. It started with Dreth. He was young, full of pride, the kind of soldier who had won enough fights to believe he had already figured out the galaxy. He had studied the intelligence files on humans the same as the rest of us. Small bipeds, no natural armor, average lifespan of roughly 80 years, emotionally unstable due to something the researchers called pair bonding. That last part always made Dreth laugh. He thought it was the funniest thing in any species profile he had ever read. The idea that humans formed permanent emotional attachments to single mates, and that those attachments made them reckless and irrational, struck him as proof that the species was simply not built for a hard universe. We had been stationed near Meridian 9 for 6 weeks as part of a diplomatic rotation. Officially, we were there to observe interspecies trade negotiations. Unofficially, we were there because the Drath hegemony wanted eyes on the humans, who had only made contact with the wider galactic community 14 months earlier, and were already causing unusual amounts of conversation among the older species. I had watched them during those 6 weeks. Genuinely watched them, not the way Dreth watched them, which was the way you watch something you have already decided is beneath you. I watched them the way you watch something you do not yet understand. They were quiet. Mostly. They smiled a lot, which none of the other species on the station did. They touched each other constantly, small touches, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing an arm, nothing aggressive, just constant low-level contact, like they needed to keep confirming that the people they cared about were still there. The researchers called it a neurological comfort behavior. Dreth called it weakness. On the 43rd day of our rotation, a human male named Marcus Cole came through the station with his mate, a woman named Nora. I know their names because I looked them up afterward. At the time, they were just 2 humans moving through the market district, which was not unusual. What was slightly unusual was that Nora was visibly pregnant, moving carefully through the crowds, and Marcus was moving with her, one hand always near but not quite touching her back, angled slightly between her and anyone who came too close. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just quietly, constantly, putting himself between her and the world. Dreth noticed them from across the corridor and made a comment I will not repeat here. Then he said he wanted to run a behavioral test. I should have stopped him. I want to be clear in this report that I knew it was a bad idea. Not for any moral reason, I admit that to my shame now. I knew it was bad tactically. We had been told by our diplomatic liaison that humans responded unusually to threats against their mates. The files used words like disproportionate and non-calculating and outside normal threat response parameters. I had flagged those phrases in my personal notes because they sounded less like descriptions of weakness and more like descriptions of something that did not follow the rules. Everything else in the galaxy followed. But Dreth outranked me on this rotation, and he was already moving, and I told myself I would step in if it got out of hand. That was my mistake. Nora had paused at a textile vendor's stall, looking at something on the table. Marcus had moved 6 steps away to check a transit board on the wall. 6 steps. That was the gap Dreth chose. He positioned himself and his 2 soldiers, Gren and Vec, directly in front of Nora. They spread their neck frills, which is our dominance display. They lowered their heads, and Dreth made the challenge sound, low and resonant, the kind of sound that has made a dozen species freeze in the moment before they run. Nora did not run. She went very still, and I could see from where I stood that her hand had moved to her stomach, which I understood later was a protective instinct rather than a gesture of fear. She looked up at Dreth, and said something in a steady voice that my translator rendered as, "You need to step back." Dreth thought this was hilarious. And then Marcus turned around. I have tried to write this part of the report 4 times. I keep deleting it and starting over because I cannot find the right words, and I am a soldier, not a poet. But I need to get this right because this is the part that matters. This is the part my commander needs to understand. Marcus turned around and he saw what was happening, and he stopped moving. Not the way someone stops when they are afraid. Not the way someone stops when they are calculating whether to run. He stopped the way a door stops when you close it, complete, final, like something had just been decided and the deciding was already done. His face did something I cannot fully describe. Whatever was on it before, whatever ordinary human expression he was wearing while he looked at the transit board, it left. What replaced it was not rage, I want to be very clear about that. It was not the hot, bright anger I have seen on 100 faces before a fight. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of how loud you have been. He put down the bag he was holding. He set it on the ground, gently, like he was setting something down that he would come back for when this was over. Then he started walking toward us. Not running. Walking. The crowd between him and Dreth parted. I am not exaggerating this for the report. I watched it happen. People moved. Species that do not share a language, that have no social connection to one another, that had been pushing through that market corridor all morning. They moved aside. Some of them, I think, did not even consciously know why they were doing it. Something in the way Marcus was moving sent a signal that older than language, and the crowd answered it. Surath saw him coming and puffed up. He turned away from Nora and squared himself up to his full height, which is considerable. Dreth stood 2.5 meters tall and was built the way Drath warriors are built, dense and armored with natural plating along the shoulders and spine. He had fought in the Rendak campaign. He had survived the siege of Outerpost Vane, which only 6 soldiers out of 40 managed to do. He had never, in his life, taken a step back from anything. He spread his frills to full display and let out the battle sound, the full one, the one that is meant to end confrontations before they start, the one that registers on every threat detection instinct every species in the known galaxy shares. Marcus walked through it like it was wind. He stopped 2 meters from Dreth and he looked up at him, because Dreth was nearly a full meter taller, and he said one thing. His voice was quiet enough that my translator almost missed it, and it was not directed at Dreth at all. He said, "Step back, love," and Nora did. What happened in the next 11 seconds I am recording as accurately as I can, with the understanding that I am a trained military observer with 14 years of experience, and I still cannot account for all of it. Dreth lunged first. He used the forward shoulder charge, which is our standard opening, designed to use our mass advantage to put the opponent on the ground immediately. It has worked against larger creatures than Marcus Cole. Marcus did not go to the ground. He moved to the side, not far, just enough, and the thing he did with his body in that small movement, the way he turned Dreth's own mass and direction against him, redirected all that momentum using what I later learned humans call leverage. I had seen it described in the intelligence files, but seeing it is not the same as reading about it. Dreth stumbled. Dreth, who had never stumbled in a fight in his life, stumbled. And in the moment he was off balance, Marcus was already there, already moving into the space the stumble created. Gren moved in from the left. Marcus took a hit from him, a real one. Gren's arm caught him across the side of the head, and the crack of it was loud enough that the nearest section of the crowd flinched back. By any reasonable physical calculation, that should have ended Marcus Cole's involvement in this situation. Gren hits hard enough to crack the outer plating on a young Drath warrior. Marcus turned his head with the impact, which I now understand is a human technique that reduces the damage from a blow. He did not stop moving. He did not even slow. He absorbed the hit like it was information and used it to place himself where he needed to be next. He put Gren down. I cannot explain exactly how, because it happened in under 2 seconds and involved his elbow, Gren's joint, and a precise angle of force that I would need a structural analysis to fully diagram. But Gren went down, hard, and he made a sound I have never heard a Drath warrior make in my 14 years of service, a short, sharp sound of complete surprise, and then he was on the floor and he was not getting up quickly. Dreth came at him again, angrier now, which is always a mistake, and I knew it was a mistake even as it was happening. Anger burns the control that makes you effective, and Dreth had lost his control entirely. He swung with everything he had, both arms, the kind of strike that has killed other species in a single contact. Marcus ducked under it. He was shorter. The height that Dreth had been using as an advantage for his entire career suddenly became the thing working against him, because Marcus was below the swing before it landed, and then he was inside Dreth's reach, which is the one place a larger opponent cannot easily defend, and he used that space. Dreth hit the floor. The sound of it moved through the crowd like a wave. 2.5 meters of Drath warrior, decorated soldier of the hegemony, the strongest fighter on our rotation, on the floor of a trading station market, and the human standing over him was breathing hard, bleeding from where Gren had hit him, and he was already turning away. He was done. That is what I keep coming back to. He did not stand over Dreth. He did not make the victory display. He did not do any of the things that every other species does when it wins a confrontation, the things we do because they are supposed to communicate dominance and establish the new social order. He was done the moment Dreth was no longer a threat, and he turned, and he walked back to Nora. She had moved to the edge of the corridor, near a wall, and she was watching him come toward her. When he reached her, he took her face in both his hands, the same hands that had just put 3 Drath soldiers on the floor, and he checked her over. Not quickly, carefully. He asked her something and she answered him, and he exhaled, a long, shaking breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. And then he put his arms around her, and he held her in the middle of that silent market, and he did not let go for a long time. Vec had not moved during the entire fight. He was our third soldier, the one who had been stationed to Dreth's right, and when I looked over at him I understood why. He was looking at Marcus and Nora, and whatever he was feeling had bypassed everything he had been trained to feel in that situation. He was not calculating a counterattack. He was not assessing whether to assist Dreth. He was just watching, with an expression that I recognized because I was wearing it too. We had been wrong. Not just about the threat assessment. About everything. The intelligence files said pair bonding made humans irrational. The files said it was a vulnerability, a lever you could use to produce fear responses or erratic behavior. Every species profile I had ever read described emotional attachment as the thing that made a creature easier to defeat, because you could use it against them. You could make them act against their own interests. You could use what they loved as a chain. We had read those files and drawn the wrong conclusion from every word of them. Because yes, love made Marcus irrational. It made him completely, utterly, absolutely irrational. It made him walk toward a threat that outweighed him by 180 kilograms and keep walking after taking a hit that should have dropped him. It made him refuse to process the information that any rational creature uses to make the decision to stop, the information about pain and odds and self-preservation. That was not a weakness. That was what happened when you removed the ceiling from a creature. When you took away the part of the brain that calculates whether something is worth it, because the answer was already decided, and the answer was yes, and the answer would always be yes. And no amount of physical input was going to change it. I have fought alongside Drath warriors who would die for the hegemony. I have stood with soldiers who were brave and skilled and dedicated. But there is a difference between a warrior who will pay any cost and a warrior for whom the cost simply does not register. We fight hard. Marcus Cole fought like the concept of stopping did not exist in his language. Dreth was back on his feet by the time I filed my preliminary incident report. He had a fractured joint in his left arm and was struggling to process what had happened to him. He kept saying the human must have had some kind of augmentation, some hidden technology, some advantage we had not detected. He needed there to be an explanation that fit the world as he understood it. I let him keep that explanation for the first few hours because I needed to write the report, and I did not have the energy to have the larger argument. But the larger argument is the only thing that matters, which is why I am writing this section of the report that my commanding officer did not ask for, and will probably not want to read. We need to reclassify the human species, immediately. Completely. We need to take every assessment we have written, every threat evaluation, every behavioral prediction, and we need to start over from the correct foundation, which is this. Humans are not a soft species that pair bond because they cannot handle being alone. Humans are a species that has spent hundreds of thousands of years becoming extraordinarily good at surviving, and they have done it by evolving the capacity to love something more than they love their own lives. And when that thing is threatened, they become something that does not respond to pain or odds or size or the threat displays of species who think those things are what determines the outcome of a confrontation. They do not fight to establish dominance. They do not fight to protect resources or territory or status. When they fight for the people they love, they fight because not fighting is simply not a thing their mind will accept, and that means there is no version of the confrontation where they stop before it is over. We have a designation in Old Drath military language that has been applied to only 3 other species in all of recorded hegemony history. The word is Vethari. It translates roughly as, the thing you do not prod. It is given to species not because they are the strongest or the fastest or the most technologically advanced, but because something about them falls outside the normal calculations of conflict, because fighting them costs more than any conceivable gain could justify. I am formally recommending that humans be reclassified under Vethari status immediately. I am recommending this because I stood in a market corridor on Meridian 9 station, and I watched a man who was bleeding and hit and outweighed by a massive margin keep walking forward without slowing, and then turn his back on 3 downed opponents and walk back to his pregnant mate and hold her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, and I understood in that moment that she was. She was the only thing in the world that mattered to him, not his safety, not the odds. Not us, her. That is not a weakness. That is the most dangerous thing I have encountered in 14 years of military service. And I have encountered quite a few dangerous things. I watched Marcus Cole hold Nora for a long time in that silent market. At some point she said something quietly against his shoulder and he laughed, a short, exhausted sound, and pressed his lips to the top of her head. Then he picked up the bag he had set down, took her hand, and they walked away together, through the crowd, which parted for them again. Gently this time. Not from fear, but from something I think was closer to respect. Nobody followed them. Nobody asked them to file an incident report. Nobody did anything except watch them go. I stood next to Vec for a while after they disappeared, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say that was going to make what we had just seen fit into the world we had believed we lived in before today. Eventually Vec looked at me and said, very quietly, "I am glad I did not move." I told him I was glad too. That is my full account of the incident at Meridian 9, submitted without redaction and without apology for its conclusions. My final recommendation, outside of the formal classification request, is personal. It is not protocol, and I include it anyway because I think it is the most important thing in this entire report. More important than the tactical reassessment, more important than the reclassification request, more important than any of the political or military implications that my commanding officer is going to spend the next several weeks managing. Do not touch what a human loves. I am telling you this as someone who watched the proof of it happen in 11 seconds, as someone who stood close enough to see Marcus Cole's face in the moment he turned away from the transit board and understood what was happening to his mate, as someone who will not forget what that face looked like for the rest of his life. Do not touch what a human loves. They will not stop. They will not weigh the cost. They will not look at you and calculate the odds and decide it is not worth it. They will simply come. And they will keep coming until it is over. End of report.